This is where the Army of the Potomac finally came of age. It finally learned how to match the fighting intensity of General Lee's soldiers. Well, it's a long way from Chancellorsville. I drove up here in a Cadillac. It took 3 hours. And as I drove, I'm thinking, why did he come? Why did General Lee put his army in motion and bring it here? Why didn't he just stay where he was? Let me say something about Joseph Hooker. The good people of Gettysburg that make a living off the several million tourists that come to this battlefield, this cemetery of a battlefield, every year owe a lot to Joseph Hooker. He just missed his opportunity, didn't he? If he had just had the mindset of General Lee or the mindset of General Grant. By now, Grant is at Jackson, Mississippi. He slammed into Joseph Johnson, who was coming with a little army of about 25,000 men from the east to deal with him. Pushed him away, and now he's turned on Pemberton, who's come out of Vicksburg with about 20,000 men. The idea had been that the two Confederate forces would have converged together, and together they would have faced Grant. But had it been General Lee out there, while Grant might have got across the Mississippi, he was never going to get across the Big Black, because that's where General Lee would have met him head on. Smash mouth to smash mouth. And if Hooker had just had that mindset at Chancellorsville, there would have been no Gettysburg. No one ever heard of Gettysburg. It's a country town in the middle of nowhere. All Hooker had to do really was just sit where he was. Just like General Lee at Antietam was in the folds of the Potomac with his flanks protected. Hooker was in the folds of the Rappahannock with his flanks protected, with a clear line of communication back to his base of supply at Fredericksburg. He's got 3 pontoon bridges across that stream. He can bring Sedgwick up from he can bring Sedgwick up from Banks Ford, and now he's got 7 Union corps, 85,000 men with unlimited supply. And there's no way General Lee is going to pass that army and get himself to Culpeper on his march toward Gettysburg. It's not going to happen. And then Hooker's going to move out just like Grant moved out at the same location a year later, and he's going to attack Lee. Now, he may not have gotten any further on a head-on assault against Lee, but at this particular moment in time, unlike any other moment in time, Hooker is facing General Lee with General Lee's only got 6 divisions. He's missing 2 divisions. They're down near Richmond. They're never going to get here in time. General Lee was never weaker in numbers than he was during those 5 days that he was dealing with Hooker. If Hooker had just seized the initiative, if he had had faith in his army and seized the initiative, his mind cold to the reality that the orders he's issuing are going to result in the deaths of thousands of anonymous men. Horrible deaths, legs and arms chopped off, heads splattered with bullets and artillery shells. If he'd just been cold to that reality and pushed that army against General Lee, he might, if he couldn't have actually crushed it and annihilated it, he certainly would have forced General Lee to retreat. And that's what General Lee was challenging him to do, is push his army to the limit of its physical endurance to stand and fight where it was. And that means that when Grant is laying siege to Vicksburg, General Joseph Hooker is going down in American history books as pushing Lee back on Richmond, so that by the time Vicksburg falls, Hooker is in front of Richmond and it's under siege, and it will never stop until its supply lines are cut off and it surrenders. That was the history in Joseph Hooker's hands that he let go because he lacked faith in his army. He didn't believe in his army. He wasn't willing to sacrifice thousands of lives. And so why did General Lee come here? Here! Look at this place. The only rational explanation, I find out here in at the end of March and Easter week. There's no tourists, but there's a lot of kids I see. They've come from probably 8th grades on chartered buses. They're all over this place. And they're standing out here in little groups and they're being lectured to. And the people that are giving them lectures are not telling them the truth, the objective reality. They're telling them a myth, a fable, a fib. It's a sad commentary on education in America. Why did he come here? Why did he spend all that energy coming here? Because he and Grant were on the same wavelength. They had the same mindset. Energy, activity, action. He meant to maneuver as far away from Virginia for as long as possible that he could. Maneuver against the enemy. Bring it to battle. Engage it in battle. It's clear that here he intended to meet the advance of the Union Army, shatter it, and then whatever happened next happened. Whether it meant that the Union Army in its main body was going to retreat 14 miles to Taneytown and the Pipe Creek line while he hustled down the Emmitsburg Pike to Emmitsburg and then another 20 miles to Frederick and stand behind the Monocacy, or whether he just found other ground out here somewhere to start another battle until he was forced to retreat, and then he'd retreat. And that happened here on July 4, 1863. Someday in the future, well beyond our lifetimes, 100 years, 1,000 years, but at some point in time, the amalgamated Americans are going to find themselves up against a wall, standing on a precipice, the abyss behind them, and there's some massive earthly force pushing them to that abyss with military power. They're on the verge of defeat, destruction, annihilation as a people. Someday that will come to pass. And they will look out and say to their past, you know, these black politicians we've got now that want to tear down all these images of General Lee, they'll come for the one we have here next. But in that future day, somebody's going to remember the character of General Lee as a soldier and wish for him to be resurrected from his grave and come save the Union